Thank you for getting that in so rapidly. Anyway, welcome back, everybody. I am here with Merbeast, and
Hello, hello.
we're gonna look over something that just got leaked out to the rest of the internet. Yeah, and so Merbeast, how much? How do you feel about this new updated memo that is laying before us?
Well, it's interesting, like a shiny new toy, but once you get the wrapping off and you play with it for a minute, you realize it's exactly the same as the old toy.
Ah, well, we'll see how much it is like the prior one. This memo is 6 pages long, an extra 3 pages tacked on. But here's the fun part. Notice in big giant red, media or public release is prohibited. So during the time that the music was playing, I was quickly planning out my quick escape over to the Ecuadorian consulate just in case the door gets pounded on. So you never know. But
Well, I like what this thing is titled. It's titled, if you look at the top, Security and Protective Measures, U.S. Military Airstrikes in Syria. Did you
wait,
notice that?
on YouTube or on the memo?
Uh,
Oh yeah.
on the memo.
Oh yeah. Oh crap. Okay, that is
Yeah,
quite
that
interesting. Well,
I wonder if they did that to camouflage it, or if somebody was just messing around and renamed it that.
that's a good question. That is hilarious. I didn't even notice that. Anyway, hey Cybertron. We're gonna go ahead and get reading into this. This actually came out just at the end of March, so it's just barely over a month old. And so, what's funny here is warning: this document shall not be distributed outside the Federal Protective Service and its Protective Security Officer (PSO) vendors without express approval from headquarters. Well, obviously, this is not a non-redacted document, so yeah, hopefully, no one gets into too much trouble over this one. But
Well, just
yeah,
if
go ahead.
anybody's wondering, it is the U means unclassified. FOUO means for official use only, and there's some down in there that say LES. That's law enforcement sensitive. None of those are classified headings, so we're not actually disseminating classified information at this point.
Yeah, and even then, when it comes to classified information, that becomes a whole different list of laws and legalese and headache, which we will not cover tonight. I don't want to deal with that.
Where's your sense of adventure?
No, not tonight. Tomorrow, I've been all for, but tonight, I just want to read through this and then maybe we'll have some fun maybe tomorrow with that or something. Anyway, continuing on. Background. U/FOUO. Photography for news, advertising, or commercial purpose is governed by 41 CFR 102-74.420. In October 2010, FPS disseminated an FPS bulletin to the field addressing the photographing of the exterior of facilities. The purpose of the bulletin was to remind FPS personnel that and PSOs that the public has a right to photograph the exterior of federal buildings from public forums. Since the publication of the bulletin, FPS has experienced increase in public's interest in photographing videotape both exterior and interior of the federal facilities protected by FPS. To include individuals expressing the First Amendment protected rights by intentionally photographing and videotaping the exterior and interior of federal facilities, and law enforcement in the course of their duties to test FPS law enforcement and PSO's response. Also, new case law impacts the interpretation and implementation of FPS enforcement regulations.
I just want to hold on for 1 second. I think we skipped past some very important things. What has been pointed out on the 2010 DHS memo, and what is even more apparent in this DHS memo, is if you look up at the top right-hand corner, you'll see there is the emblem for the Federal Protective Service. Underneath the U.S. Department of Homeland Security heading, it says Federal Protective Service. Up at the top, it says FPS internal use only. That is the Federal Protective Service. In the dissemination list, it says FPS personnel and PSOs only. PSOs are the private security officers nationwide. FPS internal use only. Warning, this document shall not be distributed or released outside the Federal Protective Service and its protective security officer vendors without express approval from headquarters. I do want to point out, because people love to make this mistake, that this document covers only the federal buildings that are being protected by the FPS. This doesn't apply to any other federal building. It doesn't apply to the Department of Defense buildings. It doesn't apply to buildings that are under the control of like the U.S. Marshals or the FBI or anybody like that. This only applies to the FPS.
Okay. Yeah, and so obviously the U.S. Marshals, I think they're in a different underneath a different agency, right?
Yeah, U.S. Marshals, yeah. They work under the Department
DOJ.
of Justice for the they're responsible for the courts, for protecting federal courtrooms.
All right. Okay. Beyond
so
that,
this background.
Yeah.
This background. So I find it really interesting that they're apparently feeling the impact from new case law that's breaking into this. I'd love to know what specific cases they're dealing with, because I haven't seen any real groundbreaking cases that turn on the CFR, the
Turner and Fields v. Philadelphia, because those sort of further hammer home the impact of, hey, yeah, if you're a government official doing something in public, you're going to be filmed. And they're already seeing, with also the First Amendment auditors and testers pushing on this.
The like Turner and by Fields, you mean like Garachi? Garachi, Philadelphia.
It's the one out of the Third Circuit.
Yeah, I thought it was like Garachi, but anyway, neither of those dealt with this particular federal regulation. So, but yeah, I'm sure that they're feeling some prodding from people. I know. Didn't you do something with one of these where they used?
Was the Anchorage courthouse, federal courthouse / visitor center, where they had the bankruptcy court in the same building as a state visitor center, and I pushed on this issue. It was actually the first time I went to court on something like this, and the prosecutor ended up dropping it because I think they pretty much knew they didn't have a case in that instance.
So it could have been you that was putting some pressure on them.
Yeah, and I'm one of the few people that will go into certain federal buildings and do the filming, just because how should I put it? I sort of got a better grasp of things, especially more modern day at times, and compared to what I was when I was younger doing this. And I'm able to better combat some of the stupid arguments that they may try to pull. Unfortunately, I do know there is limitations within the federal buildings, and that's where, as I said, you got to really do a lot of research and studying up, because that information is not always up front and right there. And so you want to try to work within where it's legal and make sure you know where that line is and try not to cross it. And if you don't know where that line is, just try not to even get too close to it where you might accidentally stumble over the gray line.
But it is really nice to notice that they are expressly aware in this memo that people are going out solely for the purpose of expressing their First Amendment rights. So that's a step in the right direction. Once you tell an FPS officer, I'm out here, I'm expressing my First Amendment rights to film the exterior of this building, that should instantly click for them. Hopefully that'll ease up some of the problems we've been having.
Yeah. Okay. And I got my mic turned up there. I thought it looked a little bit low there, so I've been fiddling with it. I thought I was loud enough. I guess I'm not animated enough to be really loud at this point. Let me know if I start blowing out your eardrums, though. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on, finish off this background. To address the increase in photography and videotaping by public, this operational readiness order reiterates the 2010 guidelines, provides clarification on public's right to photograph in publicly accessible federal facilities, buildings, entrances, lobbies, foyers, corridors, and atriums, and directs FPS law enforcement personnel and PSOs to maintain security without adversely impacting the public's rights relating to photography and videotaping.
Yeah, right there is the sad part for me. It's reiterating the 2010 guidance and just providing further clarification on it. It's a brand new shiny wrapping of the same things.
Yeah, so it pretty much is just literally we're just gonna go through, and where we think we're too vague, we're gonna just put more words in there, just to make sure to get the point across that don't be screwing with people when they're legal and all that stuff. But obviously, how often do you think the security staff really reads these memos, or at least retains what they read from these?
I don't think a lot of the PSOs will retain it, because they're probably not in that position because of their intellectual proclivity. As far as the FPS officers, they're probably hopefully a higher caliber of person, able to pass more tests and retain more information. So hopefully they'll read it.
Yeah. I see I got a new little troll in the chat there. Maybe towards the end there, I'll pull you in, Michael or Michelle Lucas, and you can go ahead and vent and go ahead and pour your drama in my direction. I do enjoy. I need some more salt for my popcorn. Anyway, continuing on.
I just want to point out, by the way, Mr. Lucas, that I am not an activist. I'm a lawyer, so you'll have to forgive me talking and going over documentation is what I do for a living. So, don't expect any auditing dramatics from me. I apologize.
And everybody knows that I don't really get active or hyper everything. A lot of my videos are boring, but boring is good.
Sometimes the silent treatment is actually the best treatment.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the photographing the exterior federal facilities. Something that pretty much any beginner would probably be doing for the first time. For the properties under the protective jurisdiction of FPS, there are currently no general security regulations prohibiting exterior photography of any federally owned or leased buildings, absent a written local rule or regulation established by the Court Security Committee, or in limited cases, a federal security committee. Furthermore, it is important to understand that 41 CFR 102-74.420 does not prohibit photography by individuals of the exterior of federally owned or leased facilities. Rather, this regulation describes when an individual may photograph the interior of the federal building, i.e. spaces occupied by tenant agency, or building entrances, lobbies, foyers, corridors, or auditoriums. Therefore, absent of, and I love this part that's in bold, therefore, absent of reasonable suspicion or probable cause indicating criminal activity, law enforcement and security personnel must allow individuals to photograph the exterior of federally owned or leased facilities from publicly accessible spaces such as streets, sidewalks, parks, and plazas, even if it's federally owned or leased.
Same thing as it's always been.
Yeah.
I do want to point out, though, that there is that one case out of California, the 9th District, that is currently making its way to the appeals court. It's Askins and Ramirez v. Department of Homeland Security, where the Department of Homeland Security used 41 CFR 102-74.420 to detain and seize the phones and pictures out of the phone of somebody who was not only not on federal property, but he was in what amounts to a traditional public forum. He was on the side of the road next to a public park outside of public property filming people passing through the port of entry. And the court said that they were still allowed to seize him, to take the pictures off his phone, delete them off his phone, and that was all fine and dandy like sour candy.
I heard you refer to that in one of your videos. Have you done like a full look at the case or anything like that yet? Or
I went over it in when the guys were arrested doing the filming the border.
Okay.
about a month ago. I went over it then, and I went over it again in my latest video when I was talking about the Code of Federal Regulations. It's out there. It's looming. It's not really dispositive of anything at this point, but it's a real turd waiting to float up to the top of the toilet.
Yeah, well, it's something that we'll definitely need to keep an eye on and get more eyeballs on it. That's for sure. Because I just heard about it on your latest video. I haven't gone back and really looked. So yeah, I'll have to go back and double check that, and maybe I'll do a further look at that after I look at the actual documents for that case. Yeah, but I sort of love how they end up. It's like, we got to make sure this sticks out more. Make it bold.
Yeah,
don't
that is
screw
nice.
with these people.
Yeah, and they, again, just because people do get it wrong so often, if you'll notice the very beginning of the paragraph, it says for properties under the protected jurisdiction of the FPS. That's what we're dealing with here. It's still just the properties the FPS is dealing with. And before you jump onto, there's no current restrictions on it. That is at the kind of the federal level. There may be local rules on it. So if somebody does tell you that you can't film, I'm 100% fine with you standing your ground. But just remember, just keep it in the back of your mind that there may be some sort of a court order or rule or something going on. Typically, it will need to be posted somewhere, so they should be able to point at a sign. But just remember that is a possibility out there.
And I do agree with that. Pretty much, it comes down to well, I need for me, I would demand documentations. Like, where can I find this written down? I need to see it in black and white. Do you have a copy of it on you? Do you have something referencing specifically where I can find this and read this? And if they can't provide that, then usually, in most cases, they're talking out their ass, in my opinion. And quite often they are talking out their ass. Very rarely have I seen it be the opposite, where they actually do have something. Because I mean, law enforcement and security personnel, they're legally allowed to lie to you. There's been a public court on the law enforcement side. I wouldn't be surprised if security can sit there and lie to you too, trying to get their way.
And they're also legally allowed to be stupid and forgetful and to misconstrue laws.
Oh, I hate that. What was that? Something North Carolina, I think it was, that went to SCOTUS over that shit. I'm just like, why? It's so stupid. All right, let's continue on. This right includes the ability to photograph any exterior security countermeasures that are viewable to the public and can be photographed or videotaped from publicly accessible spaces. I love how they just made sure to reiterate that part too. I think that's the second time they stated that.
It's absolutely awesome that they do state it, but bear that in mind when we get down towards the end, because it'll come up that that people will do this stuff to plot crimes or terrorism. So I don't know exactly where they're trying to draw the line on this. Yeah, you have the ability to do it, but is that still suspicious? It's kind of weird.
Okay, yeah, I haven't. I've given this a quick glance. I have not read this in depth, and so you're getting my reactions pretty much on the cuff right here. Okay, huh?
Hashtag spoil alert, guys.
I don't mind spoilers. Speaking of spoilers, Dumbledore dies on page 400. No, anyway.
Oh, damn it.
This right includes the ability to photograph from exterior property under control of the federal government, such as sidewalks, plazas, and parking lots, if such property is publicly accessible. Glad they clarify on that part right there, because I got hemmed up by the U.S. Marshals. Different provider, well, different people, different agency, but in the plaza or courtyard of the courthouse of federal property.
There's still US v. Cokinda, so before you get all too excited, that was where they were handing out literature on the sidewalk leading from the parking lot to the post office. So in Cokinda, the post office was allowed to control a sidewalk that led from their parking lot to their front door. So just remember that this memo isn't legally binding on anything, number one, and number two, it only applies to the FPS.
Oh yeah,
I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, this definitely only applies to the FPS, and with this specific thing we're looking at here, there is other regulations at play, as I think you've harped on me about, and a few others with like the post office kind of stuff. And I'm waiting on a copy of a document to come in that might bring some interest coming up. Oh, I see you posted the case law there. I take it.
They're hinting about it in chat. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see it. It doesn't change anything, but it will be interesting to see that document.
Okay. Well, continuing on here. As a reminder, photography videotaping absent a criminal predicate. Okay, predicate is a First Amendment protected activity. Mere photography or videotaping of an exterior federal facility without the presence of any other indicators of nefarious activity is not reportable suspicious activity under National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative made through the Suspicious Activity Reports, SAR. DHS official civil Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberty requires the photography or videotaping be performed in an unusual or surreptitious I'm going to screw that one up. Surreptitious manner that would arouse suspicion of terrorism or other criminality in a reasonable person before conducting an investigative detention.
So that vindicates everything News Now Houston ever said about you're going to generate a report, it's going to go to a fusion center, boom, there it is, black and white. There's your fusion center, right?
Pretty much. And someone's saying it's blurred. Is it showing up blurred for you on... what is it here? Let me switch to studio mode. It's showing up just fine on OBS. It's capturing just fine. It should be... check your resolution. That might be what's going on. It's probably too low resolution. I'm streaming this at 720p.
Yeah, you're absolutely crystal clear on my side.
Okay. Got it. Okay. But yeah, that is completely. You're going to be generating a report when they document you. And one of the other funny things is like, absent a criminal precedent, and they sit there suspicious of terrorism or criminality. Does my Punjabi outfit fall in the lines of terrorism? Just wondering. Would a reasonable person think I would be a terrorist just by wearing that outfit?
Well, so unusual, you know. When every time I've seen one of these officers say, well, you know, people don't normally film out here. This is unusual. This is suspicious, right? So unusual is meaningless. It really is meaningless. And surreptitious means that, you know, you're trying to hide it or something. But it's unusual or surreptitious. So they're gonna lean on the unusual. They're going to say, well, you're videotaping security measures, you're videotaping exterior security measures. Oh, yeah, you're allowed to do it. But that's unusual. And then the criminal predicate, they're not going to know that there's a criminal predicate until they do their investigation. So it's meaningless. This is gobbledygook.
Essentially, it's just a giant circle of the brain, right?
Yeah, but they're definitely going to be generating those suspicious activity reports. If they can get your ID, they will note it. They will send it in.
Oh, yeah, and even then, all they got to do is just get a good couple different angle shots of your face and run it through a system, and you're going to be in it. If you got a passport, or if you gotten done with driver's license in the last couple of years, they do facial recognition. And depending on which databases they got their hands on, it's not going to be hard to figure out who you are.
I'm going to guess the DHS has access to a lot of databases.
Oh, without doubt. They're most likely they have. The Fusion Center probably has access to that, and they'll obviously run it because the Fusion Center is the nice little bridge gap between the state and local levels and the federal databases for that kind of information.
Southern Illinois Public Observer wants to know, instead of saying over and over what it generally applies to, why not state what it specifically does or does not apply to? Normal people don't know what properties are under FPS control. Well, there's a really easy way to find out. I think the FPS has over 7,000 different properties around the United States. The way you can tell is by looking at the badge on the police officer. If it says FPS, then this document applies. If it doesn't say FPS, this document doesn't apply.
Well,
That's
FPS
the
or
easiest way to do it.
DHS. If DHS is all, they might have FPS on the badge or on their clothing, or it might say DHS, but both are in the same grouping.
FPS is a sub-agency of the DHS. An FPS memo doesn't apply upwards to DHS. I know, or let me step that one back just one quick step. It shouldn't. As we saw in that case where they were filming the Border Patrol. Border Patrol is a different sub-agency of the Department of Homeland Security. I don't believe any ports of entry are under the control of the GSA. I don't believe there are any Federal Protective Service officers there, and yet somehow this all applied to the border. So it shouldn't, but there are stupid people everywhere.
Yes, very agreeable. And ignorant people that just don't know better and haven't done the research, or just are like, I'm going to do whatever kind of thing. And toxic news, no, this is not specifically about filming in the courtroom, but it does impact it with the way the CFR is written. Though usually the courtrooms in general, courthouses in general usually apply to U.S. Marshals and Department of Justice on their system, but you will find FPS working courthouses because the courthouse may contain multiple agencies within. A good example is up there in Alaska. There's 2 different courthouses, and in one of them, literally you have the ATF. There's the U.S. Marshals. You have DHS operating out of there, and a few other agencies. And I think there was like a couple GSA offices too. Okay. Now here comes the great part. They actually do a breakdown. Let's see here. Photographs in the interior of federal facilities. Title 41, Section 102-74.420 of the Code of Federal Regulations provides federal policy concerning photograph for news, advertising, or commercial purposes. It states, except where security regulations, rules, orders, or directives apply, or federal court order or rule prohibits it, the person entering in or on federal property may take photographs of space occupied by tenant agency for non-commercial purposes only with permission of occupying agency concerned. Space occupied by tenant agency for commercial purposes only with written permission of an authorized official of occupying agency concerned, and building entrances, lobbies, foyers, corridors, or auditoriums for news purposes. And applying the regulation to FPS protected federal facilities, FPS law enforcement personnel and PSOs should consider the following information when contemplating enforcement of regulation. Okay, now the first part, the opening part of the regulation. Except where security regulation, rules, orders, or directives apply, or federal court order or rule prohibits it, persons entering in or on federal property may take photographs of, and then they have application here on the side. Photography and videotaping of interior federal facilities is allowed under conditions set forth in A through C of the regulation unless there are regulations, rules, orders, directives, or court order that prohibit it. Which I'm sort of glad they actually point this specifically out, because I think a lot of people just don't realize that first application. And maybe they'll realize this on our side with the First Amendment thing, that there could be ways that mitigate everything in A through C. What do you think on that?
Well, yeah. So the whole basis of American jurisprudence is you're allowed to do things unless and until there is a law enacted that prevents you from doing it. The purpose of this is to prohibit you, not to allow you. So every agency that has implemented a almost verbatim copy of this, and there's thousands of them out there. They do that not to allow you to film, but to prohibit where and how you can film. So it's specifically, each thing is stated specifically to show you the limitations where your freedom to film stops. And you could disagree with that, and you could think that it's wrong and all that fun stuff, but that's why they do it. It's not to allow you to film, it's to prevent you from filming when they don't want you to film.
Yeah, and obviously they try to do it all the time. I mean, I pushed back hard on it when they're very resistant with that one spot with the Anchorage Courthouse / Visitor Center. In which case, they pretty much like, okay, yeah, he's got a point. And then back down on that. And I've had a few other kerfluffles here and there with, how should I put, mixed results depending on how that's being handled. So, and still being worked on those aspects. And then let's see here, they follow up with, for example, SSA has a rule that prohibits photography and videotaping in its spaces. Similarly, many courts issue no photography or videotaping in courtrooms and surrounding areas. The prohibition must be clearly posted, or actual in-person notice must be given in order to be enforced.
Yeah, that's basically a meaningless statement. The SSA, it would be space occupied by a tenant agency.
Yeah.
So that's what they're going for there. If the SSA has rules that prohibit photography and videotaping, then you can't videotape there. Courts, they can not only control the videotaping in the courtroom, but in the surrounding area. And the reason why they're going into the prohibition must be clearly posted or actual in person is because if you look up the 41 CFR section, it's going to be in somewhere around 370, 365, 41 CFR 102-74.365. Federal agencies must post this notice to the appendix at each public entrance to each federal facility. People have tried to use that to get out from having to follow the various regulations, and courts have held that the notice can be given in person, actual notice. So that's what they're going for here. If they're at the point where they're trying to enforce a prohibition, they've already told you in person, so you have notice. It's, again, a meaningless thing at this point. Basically, they get to control what goes on in their space.
Yeah, they're going to be able to set things. And also adding into the whole courtroom thing, yeah, they're going to issue local rules. They can vary from courthouse to courthouse to regional courthouses to courthouses, depending on how that's implemented. Now, I know over here with Eugene, they have a straight-up local rule that prohibits all filming inside the courthouse. So you can't walk in at all and record, and it only applies to the the entirety of the interior, nowhere on the outside or anything like that. And then was it down there in Texas when I had a kerfuffle with U.S. Marshals over there. They did not even have a local rule that covered anywhere outside of the courtrooms. All the local rules apply to the courtrooms themselves. Nothing about the entryways, the corridors, or anything else. So, and we pointed this out to me and News Now Houston pointed this out to the person that runs security at that building. I haven't gone back and checked to see if they've amended that to fix that issue, or they've done any retraining. Maybe in the future I'll go back and do a check on that. It's hard to say.
Yeah, one of the real big problems with people enforcing rules that don't exist is that there's not a whole lot that you can do about it unless and until it turns into an arrest or something like that. Basically, best case scenario is they get a slap on their hand or
yeah,
they get from their employer, they get punishment, but they won't get actual.
And I sort of do want to, eventually start tackling this stuff again. It's just, I got stuff going on at the moment, and I don't need to pile on too much more. And I've sort of already got something in the works with the U.S. Marshals. It's just, they're going to be a different kind of monster to take on, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, continuing. A space occupied by a tenant agency for non-commercial purposes only with the permission of the occupying agency concerned. Non-commercial photography and videotaping in space occupied by federal tenant requires the verbal permission of the federal tenant. For example, a visitor to the Army Corps of Engineers office has verbal permission from the office manager to photograph the private promotion ceremony of a friend. A student is given verbal permission from the office manager to take photographs of the office for a school project. Should I say something on this one first, or do you want to?
Please.
Okay, pretty much what they're saying is for a non-commercial purpose, you just got to get the verbal permission from the manager of the facility in order to be able to properly go around and photograph the interior. What do you want to add?
Yeah, so in First Amendment kind of law, commercial speech has always held a lesser level of protection than news gathering or political speech, things like that. So they treat non-commercial, or they treat commercial speech with a little less deference. So for anything that's non-commercial speech, they have a lower bar to get over to be able to video for non-commercial speech. So that's what they're doing there. If it's non-commercial, there's a higher bar that the government would have to leap over to prevent it. If it's commercial speech, then there's a higher bar that you have to leap over to get it out there.
Yeah, and how should I put it? The issue of commercial can be argumented. Difference between non-commercial and commercial can be argumented even further, because a lot of the activities that with people that are doing the First Amendment audit testing would generally fall underneath non-commercial, even though if they got ads running on it, because you obviously pay more into it than you even get out of it with the ads for most people that are involved. And with like YouTube monetization, you don't get that until you don't even have the option to get that until you reach a certain point. And it doesn't make sense.
I think that'd be a question of fact that the trier of fact would have to determine. And I think most of the auditors would fall under activists or First Amendment protesters. I think most of them would be in a very protected class of speech. Definitely not commercial, and probably not news. So I hate to burst anybody's bubble there, but
and that's the funny thing is that main reason why I sort of early on I sort of had that confusion on myself, kind of thing in my news and media, and in which case I just refer to myself as media. It's broader, it covers more, and as is, the United States Senate and Congress couldn't figure out how to regulate what was news, and so they just refer to it as media. As long as it's an audience going to someone, it's straight up media. And they couldn't limit FOIAs to specifically what was news and what was not, because if they put a hard line definition on what specifically is news and who's it for, it would have definitely gone to the courts and most likely struck down the current FOIA laws and caused more havoc on that in that aspect. It was one of those few things that I think was probably well thought of and pretty well gone after in the deliberations and all that stuff, was that entire aspect.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. All right. So, and then we have a space occupied for commercial purposes. Well, a space by a tenant agency for commercial purposes only with the written permission authorized official of occupying agency is concerned. And they state a commercial photography and video taping in space occupied by federal tenant requires the written permission of the agency official authorized to approve commercial photography and videotaping. Journalists, news media, or other individuals photographing or videotaping for news purposes is not considered commercial purposes. Wow, they outlined it right there actually on that aspect. For example, a professional photographer who has obtained written permission from a designated official at the building housing only Department of Interior office to photograph architectural design work performed by one of the photographer's clients. A movie company is given written permission from a designated official to videotape a federal facility. I think we
so
sort of...
it's just a higher standard that they have to meet in order to do commercial photography. They have to get someone's signature on it. Typically, they're going to end up having to pay for the ability to do the shoot. They'll want whatever agency is allowing them to do the shoot will want some money back for it.
Yeah.
If you're going to shoot a movie on it, they're going to want to get paid because it's going to, cost them time and money to have people move out of the way.
And also, don't forget, I mean, if it's big enough, insurance too. Liability insurance could be a big issue. If there's something goes wrong, they want to make sure that if someone gets hurt, they're going to be covered financially on that aspect.
Oh yeah, they would definitely make like a movie company provide its own insurance. The government isn't going to carry that.
Yeah, and educate the public. We're actually just about ready to cover that in this next part here. C. Buildings, entrances, lobbies, foyers, corridors, or auditoriums for news purposes. Due to the expansive use of social media, the vast majority of the public is considered to be gathering news, to include how the federal government functions. Recognizing this fact, the public is allowed to photograph interior building entrances, lobbies, foyers, corridors, and auditoriums for publicly accessible areas. For example, someone can photograph the common space and publicly accessible lobby of a federal facility. This includes videotaping any countermeasures, including the security screening process. No,
yeah, that goes right back to the whole. You can definitely film this stuff, but if you're doing something that looks suspicious, then obviously we're going to have to send this over to the SARS.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I think they really had to hammer home this point is because I make it a point to record security screening processes and how all that works. Because you never know when you're going to catch someone tripping up and screwing up on that. I mean, that was one of the big cruxes of my arrest for the Anchorage when President Obama visited Anchorage there, was I noticed one big issue with the way they're doing security. And, of course, they obviously didn't like me documenting and pointing it out to them. And digging
one nice thing, though, is that they are being very generous with their definition for internal purposes of news purposes. The vast majority of the public is considered to be gathering news, to include how the federal government functions. That's nice.
Yeah, it's not limiting it to credentialed people that work for major news corporations or major corporations that handle news to some extent.
They're not limiting it to actual newsworthy things.
Oh, that too. Yeah, you're right.
So I was under the impression before this came out, so this is a revelation to me. So I'll put my hand up. I apparently was wrong in how the government was interpreting news purposes. But news purposes, I was under the impression was actual news stories. Like, there was a arson attempt here at this building, and so we've got the cameras in here to film because of this arson event or whatever. But now it's just, hey, you know what? I'm just going to take pictures of the screening process because this is how my government functions, and that's news. That, to me, is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and as I said, I mean, quite often my videos are boring because I'm looking at stuff just to make sure it's functioning properly, and obviously if it's functioning properly, it's going to be a boring video. It's just like, someone might be fascinated, like, maybe I can do this security process over at my place or whatever facility I control. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just how it is. Okay, anyway, continuing on here. If an individual is authorized to photograph or videotape the interior of the federal facility, as discussed above, this right includes the ability to photograph or videotape any interior security countermeasures, including security screening posts, which are viewable to the public and can be photographed or videotaped from publicly accessible spaces, i.e. Filming through the window outside to the inside where they got body scanners and all, the metal detectors and all that stuff.
I don't think it says that. I don't think it says that you could film from the outside to the inside.
Well, no, it says from publicly accessible spaces. So you could stand outside, like on the sidewalk. A good example actually was the Houston Federal Courthouse, where I ended up standing outside filming through the window, and I was on the public sidewalk filming through the window the security screening process. Fairly boring video. I don't think I published that one, but
you're ignoring the first the first whole portion of the sentence. If an individual is authorized to photograph or videotape the interior of a federal facility as discussed above.
Thank you for catching my brain fart.
No problem.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, if the authorized kind of thing. Yeah, I understand that part. Yeah, in
so
which
anywhere you're authorized to be, if you're authorized to film, you could film whatever you can see from where you're authorized to film. They can't, I believe this comes down to like a content or viewpoint restriction. The government, if they're allowing you to film in a certain spot, they may not be able to control what you film from that spot. I'm guessing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Pretty much, it comes into what you can see from that spot. And Rusty Wallace waiting for the security cameras to be hacked. Anybody that does camera security, well, setting up those security cameras, knows not to make them wireless for the federal facilities because it's a big, huge hole. You literally would have to access the wires, and that entire is a huge convoluted mess to even try to get access to. You'd be lucky to have a chance to be able to sneak in and have access to the hard wires for security camera systems. So hacking any kind of federal facility security cameras is pretty much out the window, unless you got some sort of big, huge, like Ocean's 11 kind of operation going on.
Let's slow the roll. Slow the roll on talking about hacking into government institutions. Could we just take that one step back?
Okay.
Not really comfortable with that.
I was just
FBI,
commenting.
just so you know, I had nothing to do with this. I want to disavow.
Dude, I can get you a really good suite in the Ecuadorian embassy. I've already lined up for mine. If you want some, I can get you a good room, man. They got a queen size bed.
But you can't leave for like 10 years, man. It's not worth it.
Yeah, true. All right. Continuing on. This right, however, does not authorize a photographer to intrude on restricted spaces surrounding a security post, create loud or unusual noises, or cause a nuisance, obstruct the usual use of the entrance lobbies and other commonly accessible spaces, impede or disrupt the performance of official duties by government employees or federal contractors, including the PSOs, nor prevent the public from obtaining government services provided in the facility in a timely manner. And I think this is pretty much laying out like the time, place, manner kind of thing right here. Would you agree?
No, it's basically laying out the other CFR 102-74. Like, let's see, how about 102-74.380? All persons entering in or on federal property are prohibited from improperly disposing of trash, willfully destroying, damaging property, stealing property, creating hazard, throwing articles, conforming to signs and directions. That's 41 CFR 102-74.385. Persons in and on the property must at all times comply with federal or with signs and federal police officers. Disturbances, you can't create loud or unusual noises. That's 102-74.390. You can't obstruct the normal use of entrances, foyers, lobbies. They're just throwing in all the things that you normally can't do. You still can't do those just because you have a camera in your hand.
Oh yeah, and
that's what they're saying.
Yeah, and I completely agree. A camera doesn't give you any extra rights. If you're there as a person, you're there as a person, whether you got a camera or not in your hand, or some sort of recording device.
Yeah, that's basically what they're saying. You still have to comply with all the other rules of that facility, but they can't stop you from filming if you're not violating any of those rules.
Yeah, and in this case, let's say the past times that I've gone out and filmed, I've never sat there and tried to create loud or unusual noises. I've never tried to obstruct any kind of walkway or pathway. Or made it difficult for people to try to access the benefits of that specific building or anything like that. Usually, if I end up going there, it's I'm either one, documenting, or two, going there for business and documenting my business transaction with whatever tenant agency that's within.
Yeah, that's one of the things that some of these auditors are really pushing the envelope on. They're going into federal facilities. They're making a lot of noise. They're arguing with the staff. what they're doing is they're actually putting themselves at odds with not just the filming regulations, but they're putting themselves at odds with the conduct regulations that are for that facility. And someday somebody's going to get popped, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, and I mean part of the reason why I keep giving out warnings is like, be careful, because if you don't conduct yourself in a certain way and you cross that line, there's not much that I can do to help you. Yeah, because once you break the law, you broke the law, and you're gonna get nailed on it. And what can I say? It's like, you broke the law. I can't really help you. Maybe I can help give you some legal information, but even then, that legal information is not going to apply to unbreaking the law that you broke.
Yeah.
Once it's done, it's done. It's like breaking a plate on the floor. Okay, well, guess what? You broke the plate on the floor. Time to clean it up. That's all you can do.
Yeah, luckily there aren't really huge fines for violating any of these rules. It is 30 days, up to 30 days in jail, and up to a $5,000 fine. And luckily that is for each and every instance that you may happen to violate.
Yeah. Which, and then that can easily springfield into a whole other discussion on how they can pile all that up and all that stuff. All right, so we're finally on to the guidance part of this. Guidance for FPS law enforcement officers encountering individuals taking photographs of the exterior and interior federal buildings. Observe the individual's actions to tell sometime that you believe the field interview is warranted. Remember that public has a right to photograph the exterior of federal facilities from publicly accessible spaces such as streets, sidewalks, parks, and plazas. Thank you for the reminder there. And pretty much they're telling observe first. And I agree with this. In fact, part of security is if they're not doing anything but that looks a little bit out of place, observe it first. Take notes. I don't know if you have anything on that.
Yeah, good luck. They're gonna walk up. Oh, what you doing?
Oh yeah, they're gonna do that all the time. Yeah, it's very rarely they're gonna observe first. In most cases I've seen, if they're gonna come up and approach you, they're gonna come up and approach you right away.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. Wait a minute. Yeah, that would have been nice with the FBI guy over there with News Now Houston and Teresa over DC. Identify yourself.
Hey, it goes a long way, I think. Once an officer is willing to do that, it seems like whenever...
You can find it in About page on my YouTube channel if you want to get a copy of this, and I'll go ahead and send it to you. I'll look at getting it put up on like Mega or something like that, so that way you guys can get a copy of it that way. Let's see, continuing on. Conduct an FI or field interview to determine the process for taking photographs of the facility and to endeavor to ascertain the identity of the individual. Obviously, we know why they want your identity, so they can better generate that report on you.
Do you have any ID, sir? Do you have an ID? Do you happen to have an ID, sir? Do you mind showing me your ID, sir?
Oh, yeah. Note that such encounters are voluntary contacts, not detentions. I want to emphasize not detentions. Obviously, though, how often do you think they're going to listen to that one?
Well, I think what they're going to end up doing is they're going to say things like, oh, no, you can't leave. And then they'll be asked, well, am I being detained? And they'll say, I just need to find out who you are and what you're doing. And they won't answer it. They'll do that shtick.
Yeah, but if I remember correctly, there was a court case that says if the person, I think it's case law also, that if a person feels that they are detained, they are being, in fact, detained by the police, whether the police intended that or not. Because of
if a reasonable person wouldn't feel free to leave under those
circumstances,
kind of situations,
yeah,
then yeah. But the court has weird views on that. So, like, the court said that most people won't mind a Terry stop. Most people won't mind being frisked for weapons under a Terry frisk. Most people won't mind getting stopped 100 miles away from the border at a border checkpoint. So,
that last one, I do mind being stopped, and I'm probably me and several others, but obviously I'm surprised how many people actually allow that to fly.
I think most people don't like it, but
yeah,
the justices of the Supreme Court are a long ways away from any border checkpoint, and they never have to deal with it. And so in their heads, they're thinking, well, gosh golly, if I have to stop just to answer one silly question, what's the big deal? And they don't realize that there's people who live in those communities that have to drive through those 2-4 times a day.
If not more than that, too. Yeah, because it's like, okay, run to work, come back. Oh, I got to run back over to town to run this errand. Oh, I have to pass back over to here to grab something so I can run it back over to this place. Yeah, it's infuriating, I can tell.
So so you can't always say, like, well, I would feel like I could leave. I feel like I'm detained. The officers try to leave themselves wiggle room because they know they're walking a fine line. That's why they play those little word games. No, I just need your ID. You could go just as soon as you give me your ID. That kind of stuff. That's why they do it.
And my stunt for that specific situation, it's a little bit higher on the risk, is when they start pulling that kind of stuff, I just start to walk away. If I'm wanting to leave, or I want to see if I'm really being detained or not when they're giving me half-assed answers like that, I just walk away. And if they try to stop me, then it's a detention.
Then you know, right?
Yeah, and at that point, you know. It's a little bit of a gamble, but it's a good gamble in a way if you're right. And say it's not a detention, well, you're free to go, and they're just gonna watch you, or they might follow you. In which case, guess what? It's still not a de facto detention at that point. But as soon as they try to stop you from leaving, that turns it into a de facto detention, and you got proof of it if you're documenting it properly.
Yeah, it's always good to put it to the test. Like when News Now Houston, the guy wanted his ID just on the video last night. He wanted his ID for the obscene language, and because he was going to write him a citation. News Now just held out his hands. Fine, arrest me. And that the cop knew. He knew he couldn't do it, and that just changed everything. I'm not going to arrest you for this. It's just you just took all the wind out of his sails. He doesn't have anything left to threaten you with as soon as you're like, put up or shut up. You know,
exactly.
If I'm not detained, then I'm leaving. You get to figure it out from there.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, that's the biggest thing is you pull the sort of like the nuke thing. It's like, okay, well, if you're really wanting to push it, go ahead and arrest me, and you just straight up tell them, and if they throw the cuffs on you, you're arrested, and then you'll go through whatever manners of dealing with that in that direction. If not, yeah, it's them pretty much being screwed over. Hey, Juju, nice to see you on here. Yeah, this is the new 2018 memo we're going over.
And I'm not actually sure that it does increase your odds of being arrested or detained. If the cop has already figured in his head that he has the right to detain you, but he just wants to play it safe and you force him to detain you, you haven't really changed anything. Had you stayed there, you would have been just as detained as if you walked away. So yeah. I don't really think you're really changing anything. As far as I know, there's no statutes out there that say that, you know, you're resisting detention and that's a Class C misdemeanor or something.
Yeah, well, the thing is you do have those certain states have like really broad resisting arrest charges and stuff like that, or resisting, in which case they might try to go for an interfering charge. Actually, I think it would be more of like an interfering charge they would
interfering or obstruction, right? But at that point, you're like, hey, I asked him if I was detained, and he said you refused to answer me, so you know, I didn't feel like I was detained. How are you obstructing? That would be a much easier case for a lawyer to win if it did come down to it. If they did try to charge you with it, and you've been filming, and you ask like 2 or 3 times, "Am I being detained?" and the cop won't answer you, like, "Fine, I'm going to walk away then." I mean, good luck getting a conviction.
And speculative vlogger, if you notice in the red here, it says media or public use is prohibited. This is a leaked document. So we all got lucky in getting it to fall in our hands. We're being like WikiLeaks. We're Julian Assange here. Someone like Edward Snowden gave it to us. Continuing on here. Thus, the individual does not have to answer any of your questions or identify him or herself. Thank you for pointing that out.
Captain Obvious.
A photographer may not be detained unless and until the officer develops reasonable suspicion for a brief Terry stop or probable cause for an arrest. So
Yeah.
they lay out the IRS or PC for those specific avenues. It's like, you better have this before you even make an attempt to do that.
It doesn't seem like officers really understand what reasonable suspicion is, though, just from watching these videos. They screw it up every time. Well, that's suspicious. It's suspicious to see somebody out here filming. I've never seen anybody do it, so I'm suspicious. Wouldn't you be suspicious? Yeah. I don't think you understand the Terry standard.
Yeah, it's got to be of an actual crime that is potentially going to happen, or it has already happened.
Yeah, you actually have to. Well, they don't have to state it to the suspect.
Oh no, they don't have to state it.
Be able to state a specific crime to the court, and they have to be able to articulate what facts led them to believe that that specific crime was afoot. And they don't have that. They're like, yeah, he's filming. Okay, what specific crime? They got nothing.
Yeah. And and that reminds me, I'm gonna make a documents dump section over on my Discord, and it will be the PDF file will be available for download for your Discord, on Discord if you want to pull it from there. Okay, continuing on, where was I? Let's see here. Because the field interview, this volunteer officer should not seize the camera or its contents, and must be cautious not to give such orders to photographers to erase the contents of the camera, as this constitutes as a seizure or detention. How many times have we heard law enforcement and security just sit there and say, well, you better delete that, especially when they're working for some sort of government agency?
Believe it or not, I haven't heard that in a long time. Have you?
I think the last time I heard it was this winter, or it was in the last, 6 months, and I think it dealt with a... it might have been a Social Security office. I can't remember. And no, it wasn't News Now. Well, I don't think they told News Now Patrick to do that. But I think it was some other incident, if I remember correctly, where a guy got shoved over. He was getting pushed out of the building by a security person. And
told to delete the footage.
Well, the lady was told about she couldn't film, she would have to delete it or something like that.
Huh. Okay.
And I thought Spy Team Satan had rules here. Give me a second here. I'm going to take a quick detour. Didn't he have the rules to... Yeah. Hey, Spy Team Satan, you should be able to go ahead and post that as just one link there. You got moderator status, so you can post full-on links in the chat and not have to worry about it not showing up. All right, continuing on here. Photography, field interview. Field interview does not see. If the field interview does not yield. If the field interview does not yield a reasonable belief of criminal behavior or terrorist activity, I love how they add in the terrorist activity part. The photography shall be permitted to proceed unimpeded.
Yeah.
It should.
So, again, they don't really, what's a reasonable belief of criminal behavior? Are they going to a Terry stop?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Let's see. And they got a sub-bullet.
Are they going for?
And they got a sub-bullet. If the field interview does yield a reasonable amount of criminal behavior or terrorist activity, take appropriate police action. Notify FPS Mega Center and your supervisor.
Yeah, the Mega Center is like a fusion center. They coordinate with all sorts of different law enforcement agencies there. So,
yeah. But I think, the question is reasonable belief. That is so open up to interpretation, and it's well, it's also very subjective too.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that as a legal standard. Reasonable belief is a legal standard. Have a reasonable belief of criminal behavior.
You are correct. I don't think
that's a weird one.
Yeah, well, wasn't it also? Didn't they actually point that out in the Atkins v. Knight thing too? Reasonable belief.
You've got reasonable suspicion. That's the Terry stop.
Yeah.
And then from there, you've got probable cause. That's once you get probable cause, you can make an arrest.
No, oh,
So
wait. I think I'm cycling back with where it was the officer's own interpretation that it was a high crime neighborhood. I think I remember listening to you because you're going off on that. It needs to be documented, not based off the assumption of the officer kind of thing. I think
I would never refer back to Akins v. Knight because that is just a poop hole of a case.
Well, no, I'm just referring to your commentary back on that because you're like you tore that one even more to shreds than I did. So,
but reasonable belief isn't a legal standard for criminal things. So, I'm sorry. It sounds like I'm being stupid here, but when you're looking at a document that's trying to tell police officers how to enforce laws, and it's using a non-legal standard to tell them, I'm just a little, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's a meaningless statement. So is it up to the individual? Is it reasonable to the average person? Is it reasonable to other officers? What is a reasonable belief standard? That's where I'm going with it. I'm sorry for going off on it. It's just frustrating when they throw things out there like that because trying to understand what they're saying, you can't. It's meaningless words.
I mean, I've documented it. News Now Houston's documented it where you got just them not acting professional at all. Let's see here. Yep. People photographing federal property cannot impede law enforcement operations or egress of people or vehicles entering the facility. If an individual does this, the FPS Leo may ask the person to move and videotape or photograph from a different area, but should avoid ordering the individual to completely stop videotaping or photographing. If necessary to carry out their duties in a safe and effective manner, Leos may temporarily restrict access to an area, usually by employing police line tapes, the FPS Directive 15.5.2.1 high volume arrest, which is quite interesting.
I don't think we have access to that.
Yeah, I think if this was redacted, almost certainly I'm pretty sure this specific thing would be redacted because it refers to a direct document within the facility, within their operations. Be aware that some individuals photographing or videotaping federal facilities for the purpose of testing law enforcement response to First Amendment protected activity are very knowledgeable about the First Amendment and government regulations pertaining to photography and videotaping.
Yeah, well, that's good. You're making an impact, right?
Yeah. The fact they had to add a completely big sub-bullet, a really long sentence for specifically with us, warning them, there are people that do this and know a lot about this already. Be aware of them.
Well, you know, I think most people like to do the whole, you know, if you can't baffle them with bullshit, then, you know, you can try other things. But this is saying, hey, you know, these guys know what they're talking about. So don't try to blow sunshine up their skirts. Just treat them like these policies tell you to treat them, and avoid any potential litigation for false arrest or, you know, a rights violation. I think that's where they're going with it.
Yeah, I think that's why they put that in there, because obviously some security personnel will try to lie, as we stated earlier. Obviously, their smoke and mirrors just doesn't work on someone that knows all the tricks behind a lot of the scenes. They may not know all, but they know most of them.
Hey, News Now Tennessee, I just want to point out that I didn't get paid to write this memo, so I can't be held responsible for what somebody else wrote in it. I'm not getting paid to read this memo, and if you do get an attorney, you probably want somebody like me who will actually look at this stuff and figure out that reasonable belief is not a legal standard, and that is, since it is not a legal standard, putting it in that sentence doesn't give the field or doesn't give the police officer any real guidance on how to deal with the situation. Because it doesn't give that officer real guidance on how to deal with the situation, it opens up a lot of potential for disastrous results. It opens up the potential for possible 1983 lawsuits for unlawful arrests, because arrest has to be predicated on probable cause, not on reasonable belief. So it says if the field interview yields a reasonable belief of criminal behavior or terrorist activity, take appropriate police action. What is that? What is the appropriate police action for reasonable belief? We know what the appropriate police action is for probable cause. That would be arrest. We know what the appropriate police action is for reasonable suspicion. That would be a Terry stop. But we don't know what appropriate police action is for reasonable belief. Now, they may have defined that in another document, but we're not there. We don't have that other document. So me trying to understand this as a lawyer, I have to look at this and try to figure out what they're saying. And a lawyer wrote this. So either it was a bad lawyer or it's referring to something in another document. That's why I'm stuck on it, because it's not that I'm a bad lawyer that I can't figure it out. It's because either I'm missing information or the person who wrote it wrote sloppy. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. No, it's good to get that context out there. So we got that. We're on page 5 here. The guidance for PSOs encountering individuals taking photographs of the exterior and interior of the federal buildings. Or wait, didn't I just read this? Did they redo this all?
They go over it for the PSOs. Are the the security officers?
Oh, okay.
Not the FPS.
Okay. So this one's for 2 different groups. Got it. And so let's see here.
The PSOs have a lower authority to, like, they can't make arrests and things like that.
Observe the individual's actions until such time you believe the field interview is warranted. Remember, the public has a right to photograph exterior facilities from publicly accessible spaces such as streets, sidewalks, and plazas. Carry over that. Approach the individual taking photographs only if the individual is on federal property. PSOs
Bravo. I love that. Oh, the security officers need to stay the frick off the sidewalk. But go on.
PSOs are only authorized to conduct security activities while on duty at federally owned or leased facilities. Yeah, I do agree with this part. This statement, I guess they really needed to push this point. Don't be going off the grounds just to go and enforce a policy that's only enforceable on the inside.
Exactly.
And of course they have identify yourself in here.
I like that too.
Conduct a field interview to determine the purpose for taking photographs of the facility and endeavor to ascertain the identity of the individual. Note that such encounters are voluntary, not detention. Thus, the individual does not have to answer your questions or identify him or herself. Because the initial interview is involuntary, PSO should not seize the camera or its contents and must be cautious not to give such orders to photographer to erase the contents of the camera as it constitutes a seizure or detention. If the field interview does not yield a reasonable belief or suspicion of activity, the photographer should be permitted to proceed unimpeded. If the field interview does yield reasonable suspicious activity, immediately contact FPS Mega Center and request an FPS officer. Become a good witness and note the individual's physical description, vehicle description, direction of travel, etc. Update the FPS Mega Center and provide information to the FPS officer upon approval. So, pretty much, just be a good witness, document everything, and this is actually part of good security process right here, is making sure you document. If you're working security, you see something out of place, pull out that notepad or get up the notepad on the computer or whatever, and start noting down everything that will identify the person, what they're doing, their activity, and all that stuff, time, place, all that stuff. It's very important. I'm all for security and being it properly done. It's just quite often we don't see security personnel do this kind of stuff. They just want to go over and hassle someone.
But just remember that at this point, the FPS Mega Center will be updated with this information because some PSO had, and I'm going to quote, a reasonable belief of suspicious activity.
Oh gosh, that's bringing back nightmares of listening to several other people's videos, including mine.
I'm strongly suspecting that this is just a poorly written document.
Yeah, I'm suspecting that too, and with a few things I got in here.
I'm thinking they mean if it does yield reasonable suspicion, I think is what they mean there. And I think at the field interview, instead of reasonable belief of criminal behavior, I think they mean actual probable cause.
Yeah, yeah. Changing it. Maybe they'll do a revision after we've dug through this. Maybe someone higher up will get a notice, and they'll correct the grammar on this. Maybe
they never corrected the 2010 memo.
True that. Well, this in a way is sort of a correction, but it still got problems with it, obviously. So yeah, you're right. They never fixed it.
Yeah, our government money at work, right?
Yeah. All contact with public, including photographers, must be conducted in a professional manner. PSO personnel should not be distracted from their duties by engaging, assisting in the photographic effort, posing for or taking pictures. Be aware of some individuals photographing or videotaping federal facilities for the purpose of testing your response to a First Amendment protected activity are very knowledgeable about the First Amendment and government regulations pertaining to photography and videotaping. I do I just love how they have to reiterate that every single time.
I actually appreciate that. I mean, when they get aware of us and they stop reacting to us, and I say us, I know I'm not an auditor, but you know what I mean. When they stop reacting to the auditors, then that means that the auditors have won. That means that they're going to respect everybody's First Amendment rights out there, because auditors look like people. People take pictures. If they see a person taking a picture and they don't react to them, problem solved.
Yeah, for me, that's what I aim for when I go out there and film. I aim for either no interaction, or depending on the facility, I would expect some sort of reaction, but it'd be a civil kind of thing, and it was just a basic security check kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's about a lot of yeah.
A lot of places are actually required by policy to call the police if they see something unusual. It's not so. Like a lot of these auditors, they get upset when, like when News Now Houston, when he was taking pictures outside of the nuclear facility, it is probably the policy of that facility to call the police, not because that they think the person is doing anything wrong, but because it's always better to be safe than sorry. There's nothing wrong with having the police do a voluntary contact just to come out and say hi. The courts have held that there's no issue with that. And as long as they're polite, professional, and they don't try to step things up and detain you or ask for ID or something like that, it's really no harm, no foul. So when these people
the ask for ID, I'm all fine with them asking for ID, but they have to keep in mind it's a request. They're asking, they're not telling. When they step into telling you to identify yourself or to give over ID, that's where I sort of have an issue. Go ahead, though.
I strongly have an issue with them even asking for ID. I know they're allowed to, but most people don't realize that they can say no. And so the police officers are in a habit of asking for it because they know that they'll get it. And to me, that's number one, that's lazy policing. Number two, it's not going to tell anybody why you're there doing what you're doing. It's not useful. It's counterproductive, I think, actually. So what, they get the ID, they run it, you don't have any warrants, they hand it back to you, and they go on their merry way. But what if you really were there trying to figure out how to blow the place up? It's terrible policing. I think it should be dealt with.
Yeah. Well, we'll maybe have a conversation about that later on, and about our understandings of that kind of thing. I think that would actually be a very interesting discussion.
It may be short.
Yeah, it probably would be a short. It would probably have to be part of a series or something like that, where we sit there and debate over something. A bunch of short arguments. Analysis. Pre-operational surveillance is one of the most important steps that criminals and terrorists employ in pre-attack planning. One of the most popular forms of pre-operational surveillance is photographing the target to find strengths, weaknesses, security posts, entries, exits, and more. And more. Because of this, it is extremely important that FPS personnel and PSOs use the proactive methods described above to determine whether individuals who are photographing federal buildings are of concern. At the time, however, FPS personnel and PSOs must be sensitive that the individuals have a right to exterior photography from publicly accessible spaces and interior photography under certain circumstances described in the regulations.
So all that fun stuff they said that, you can film exterior security and interior security and checkpoints. If you do it, they're going to think that you're doing it for nefarious reasons. They will approach you. They may believe that they have a reasonable belief of suspicious activity, and they may send your picture and your description to the FPS Mega Center, and all of a sudden you may find yourself on a no-fly list. Yay.
The thing is, I'm actually quite surprised that I have not been added to a no-fly list. And because my home state is Alaska, it would be very detrimental on that kind of an impact. And I'm just waiting for that one person to go and hit that check mark, and I make one hell of a stink out of it. But that could be also the reason. Yeah, that could also be
somebody else with the same name as you may have suffered your fate. They may have checked the wrong person's name because of you. Yeah. You never know.
Well, it is a very popular legal name, that is for sure. So, that is a strong possibility. You are correct that this is sort of giving them an out, even though that modern day terrorists don't really need to do that because they use like Google Maps for this stuff. And Google Maps lower the high resolution, the low where you can see the cars and all that stuff. That's actually provided by the Department of Agriculture. They do these aerial flyovers of the area, and that's why they get all those great pictures. And that's from aerial flyovers done by the government. They just get a copy of that and throw it up as saying it's theirs.
I personally have no knowledge of what criminals or terrorists, what methods they employ to pre-plan attacks. But I do think that it's kind of stupid to put your security measures in positions where they can be easily filmed if that is an issue.
You know what I really need to do, and I haven't done this, this would probably even put me on several watch lists, is talk about how a terrorist organization would go about in planning and what they would be doing. And how they do that.
That would be a different stream when I'm not there.
Yeah, exactly. But because there is misconceptions, because this, one of the most popular forums, is actually not true, what they're talking about. It is not true. They're not going to sit there and be in person with a camera to bring attention to themselves. There's just a lot of misconceptions.
No first-hand knowledge of this, and you disavow all criminals and terrorist organizations, and you have no intention of acting on any of this. This is purely for hypothetical purposes. Isn't that right?
Yes, okay. This is purely hypothetical.
Awesome.
Don't hurt me, YouTube. Don't hurt me. No, I'm joking. No, actually, Twitch would be the first one to hurt me on that aspect. But anyway, continuing on here. Geographic areas nationwide. This operational readiness order becomes effective upon receipt and remains effective until canceled. And then they give a bunch of resources and people to talk to. Hey, we might have the attorney that wrote it. So
yeah, I'm not entirely sure. They list several attorneys.
Yeah,
here. But I wouldn't necessarily say that one of these are probably ranking attorneys. If an attorney wrote it, it was probably some brand new scrub right out of law school, or an intern, or a paralegal.
Yeah, and then someone just looked it over. It's like, oh, this looks okay. Stamp goes on its way.
Yeah.
I've seen how that works. Let's see. Warning for official use. Let's see, this document's for official use only, law enforcement sensitive. It contains information that may be exempt from public release under Freedom of Information Act. It is to be controlled, stored, handled, transmitted, distributed, and disposed of in accordance with DHS policy, published as the management directive number relating to sensitive but unclassified information is not to be released to the public or other personnel who do have a valid need to know without prior approval of the Federal Protective Services. Protective operations. For any questions regarding this order, please contact the Protective Operations Division via email. This document shall not be distributed or released outside the Federal Protective Services without express approval from headquarters. However, portions of this document may be shared with other law enforcement partner agencies that have valid need to know without further approval. Dissemination to members of the public or any individual or organization associated with the media affiliate. Let's see here. Dissemination to members of the public or any individual or organization associated with the media affiliate is prohibited. I think
oops.
I think that was a oops there.
That cat's out of the bag there, buddy. You're not going to stuff it back in.
Yeah, I mean, as is, I could see where, references to documents that might need to be X'd out, but I think there was a lot more X'd out than there needed to be on the other DHS memo. And we sort of get an inkling with, what was it? The one I think that stood out to me, which I think would be X'd out on, well, I'm pretty sure this part right here, this analysis, would be censored. And trying to remember, where was the other one?
Just out of curiosity, though, what if any of this did you find to be shocking or something that is going to drastically undermine the ability of the FPS to provide security for the GSA?
To be honest, I don't really see anything that would undermine any of their ability to provide security.
I know it's terrible that they hide these things as, for official use only, and they don't allow the public to see them. There's no transparency in our government, and when they do release it, they redact meaningless stuff out of it. Like nobody cares that these are the steps that a officer is going to take. Everybody knows they're going to walk up, they're going to basically introduce himself, ask for your ID, ask you what you're doing there. Everybody knows that. Why do you need to censor that?
Yeah, here it is. If necessary, this would be the other one right here, a reference to another thing. Now, I'm betting if this was censored, this entire sentence would be gone, when in all reality, they would just need to remove this part right here, if they want, because it's not a public document or whatever.
Sure, but even then, who cares? Why not make that one so we could know what the procedures are supposed to be when they're trying to restrict access to an area? Because, like, if you look at the Mexican Padilla issue where they were telling them to step back away from the ambulance, and they were like, how far? Why not just have a document out there that people could look at ahead of time and be like, oh, I'm supposed to step back X number of feet. Boom, there you go, problem solved.
Yeah, and the thing is having a better understanding it also gives a better understanding for people when they look at this. I understand the whole terrorist kind of thing because I've studied that kind of stuff. I'm sort of naturally
for hypothetical reasons.
Yeah, in the military, you had to learn these aspects to protect against it.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, having that, that's part of the reason why I have that understanding and all that stuff, is because I went through some of the training that for things to watch out on. So that sort of gives me an understanding, an idea on how these things work. And let's say I come over the approach, observe, and then come over and approach if you got kind of thing. This is great information for the general public right there. I don't see why there needs to be. That would be X'd out or anything like that. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't be. But just a hypothetical, this could possibly be out, or they could, have a bunch of redactions within this first area that deals with FOUO. There could be a ton of redactions in here, and it would be meaningless. But leave this lower one with the guidance for PSOs really unaffected. That's the thing.
I think in the 2010 they had both of those heavily redacted.
Yeah, so, I don't have that one on my hard drive. I got that stored on another thing, and I can pull that up. Maybe I'll do a comparison video at a later time. But I've been at this for, we've been at this for 90 minutes. So we might as well go ahead and call it an end to a stream. It was good having you on here and all that stuff. Why don't you go ahead and plug your channel real fast so this way people know where to find you.
Quickly, just to summarize it though for people, the only thing that changed on this that I could see is that they did define news purposes as just the public being interested in filming how the government functions. So that's something that you may use to your advantage when you go out there and you're actually auditing. So remember that that's the way they defined it. That's an important takeaway. The underlying CFR, the 41 section 102-74.420, you have to remember that that did not change. That is the actual law that they could charge you with a violation of. That didn't change. It's just that their guidance around that law for what they want their officers to do has changed. So that's all I really wanted to make sure everybody took away from it. Nothing's really changed in your ability to film. The only thing that I've noticed of interest is the change in news purposes. My channel is Merbeast. It's a terrible channel that all I do is talk about law. I never do any auditing. I never will. But if you have any questions, feel free to come to my channel and ask them, or not. You do you, boo.
Yeah, and as is, I do recommend checking them out, especially when you want to learn more on the legal aspects. If you're going to get involved in First Amendment auditing, testing, or even cop watching, I would just recommend taking a peek over his channel, see if there's any of the titles stick out to you that you might want to check out. He got some interesting takes. He's got a unique perspective and understanding compared to me, who is all I am is knowledge read up on a lot of stuff, and even then I miss and skip over on details. Merbeast has been able to catch me on stuff and fill in the holes for people that haven't that want to get that kind of information or have additional questions and stuff like that. Also, there was something you did recently I need to start directing people at when they ask. Oh yeah, it was the courthouse thing. I get to be lazy to say, hey, he did a better video than I would. Go check it out when it comes to the whole courthouse filming and all that aspect.
Yay, I did a thing.
Anyway, I am Bunny Boots Inc. Live stream as usual. Well, this is just one of the one-off live streams of just various kinds of interesting last-minute news that's popped out today. I wanted to cover it all. It's been fun having you guys here. I will maybe talk with you a little bit later on this week. There's going to be an announcement with changes with strategic non-compliance that me and Mike Blue Hair have hashed out and taken care of. And what is the channel name? It is Merbeast, just like it is spelt when you see his Discord name in the upper left-hand corner or in the title. Just copy paste that, and you should be able to find his his channel that way. Anyway, you guys have a good evening. I know I'm gonna go and have myself a greasy burger here in a few minutes. So, fast food. Later.
Yummy.